Good afternoon. I hope that you have no problem finding the facilities. I would like to welcome you to the first stakeholder meeting of the Admission Banking and Trading Program. This program is a revamped version of our old Admission Reduction Credit Stakeholder Group and has been updated to include all the programs in the Admission Banking and Trading Program. My name is Ivan Gray, and I will be presenting and facilitating the meeting this evening. I want to take this time to introduce some members who have traveled with me. First, in the middle, we have Mr. Chance Gooden. He is the team leader for the Stationary Source Program. We have Mr. Brandon Gorlick. He is the work lead for the Admission Banking and Trading Program. And Mr. Johnny Vermillion is a senior engineer from the Air-Permits Division, where he's a technical specialist. We were going to ask that you hold all questions until the end of the presentation. We've planned a question and answer session immediately following this presentation. If during the presentation you should have some questions, I would ask that you write down the page number of the slide and the question. That way when we go back to it, we'll be able to go back to that slide and maybe be more readily to answer the question. If you want to know, you will hear me use the term facility a lot in this presentation. And I want to just clarify that facility basically means an individual piece of equipment. Today's presentation will cover the use of admission banking and trading programs for permit offset requirements in the Houston-Galveston 8-hour ozone non-attainment area. Our goal is to give you some background on using offsets. We're going to touch on offsetting, offset ratios, then we're going to go over the role of the admission banking and trading program in offsetting. Once again, once the presentation is completed, we'll open the floor for informal comments and open discussion. In the Texas Administrative Code 116.150 D3, it says that offsets are required for permits that net emissions increase are greater than the significant levels. For the most part, emission reduction credit ERCs have been used. But as you can see from the slide, the total number of NOx and VOC ERCs available at the time of this presentation are very limited. What many of us may not know is that there are alternatives to using ERCs. There are discrete emission reduction credits, mass emission cap and trade, highly reactive volatile organic compound, HRVOCs, allowances that we refer to as HEC allowances. So for those of you new to permitting and the EBT program, the question usually is, what is offsetting? And it simply means a reduction in emissions from an existing source that mitigates the impact of proposed new or modified source. This came from the Federal Clean Air Act, which requires that offsets be supplied for the emissions associated with the review. Whenever a new or modified facility commences operation, the emissions must be offset, and depending on the designation of the non-attainment area, the ratio of offsets will be as follows. As you can see, the designation of the area will determine the offset ratio. And since we are dealing with the HGB area, the Houston-Galveston-Brazoria area, we know that the area is rated as severe. Therefore, the offset ratio is 1.3 to 1. And we want to talk about ERCs as offsets. ERCs are credits that have been issued from the reduction of criteria pollutants or precursors to criteria pollutants such as CO, NOx, PM10, SO2, and VOCs. ERCs can only be generated and used in non-attainment areas. Also, in order to generate credits, the non-attainment area must be designated non-attainment specifically for that criteria pollutant. So since we are mainly dealing with the HGB area, we know that it's been designated non-attainment for ozone. And therefore, you can only generate NOx and VOC ERCs, which are precursors to ozone. One of the things you will hear is that ERCs must be credible. And one way that I was taught that was ERCs have perks. That means they are permanent, enforceable, real, quantifiable, and surplus. First, the reduction must be permanent. That means that the reduction must be long-lasting and remain in place for the life of the facility. Enforceable means that the company must commit to operate at that permanent reduction. There is a list of ways to make ERCs enforceable listed in 101, 303, D4. Now, real means that the reduction is be just that, real. The ERC must be generated from actual reductions in emissions, so by just reducing your allowed permit limit does not guarantee the generation of an ERC. Fourthly, the emission must be quantifiable. That means that using replicable methods such as data from SIMS, the emissions at the site can be measured, and the reductions will show in the testing. Lastly, we have surplus. You see, it's not just enough to make reductions, and while we're grateful for every attempt to make the air we breathe better, the reductions must not have been required by local, state, federal, or any agreed upon order you may have. And they also cannot be counted as surplus if the reductions are being relied upon by the state implementation plan. One thing I would like to emphasize is that the ERC must be surplus at the time it was created, as well as when it's used. So what it means is we will check your permit, we will check the application when the ERC is submitted to make sure it is surplus when it was generated and surplus when it's used. So how are ERCs generated? The primary way ERCs are generated is from shutdowns. That doesn't mean to just turn off the facility, but you must also amend your permit to show the facility was shut down. So if you submit an ERC generation, one of the first things we would do is check the permit to see if the facility is still shown on the permit. Another way is the installation of pollution control equipment with an efficiency greater than what is required. And as we've shown on this slide, there are other ways to generate ERCs. We won't go too deeply into those. So now you've decided that using ERCs is best for you. If you do not have any of your own, you can purchase ERCs from other companies using the form EC4, and this form is called the Application for Transfer of Emission Credits. On the banking team, we call this the ERC trade form. You will receive a letter or notice saying the trade has been processed, and you will receive a copy of the ERC certificate. The next step will be to submit a form EC3. This is the notice of intent to use emission credits. This form must be submitted before the ERCs expire. This form must also be submitted after your permit request is administratively complete but prior to construction. After the intent is submitted, then the ERCs will be set aside, and they will be safe from any regulatory changes that would devalue the ERCs. This means this will protect you from having any of them to buy more ERCs should the rule change and the value of the ERCs devalue. I must point out that if for some reason you do not use the ERCs for that particular intent, then they will become subject to regulations once again to include any regulations that may have come about during the time that the ERCs were being held. Once air permits verifies and enforces the offset amount and the special conditions of the permit, the banking team will then approve the intent to use. The next two slides combine the air permits timeline and the banking timeline. The first step is to submit the PI1, which is a general application. If the non-attainment review is triggered, the company proposes layer and will submit the form EC3 to the banking team. The banking team will begin the re-review process, but will hold off in approving the intent to use until Air Permits Division completes the review of layer and confirms the amount of the offsets needed. As the Air Permits team develops the special conditions that will specify the amount of offsets to be provided, the new permit is issued, and the banking team will complete the request to use ERCs as offsets. The company may then commence operation of their new modified operation. And I know there's a lot on this slide, so if you would just bear me a moment to take a sip of water, you can catch up on that slide. I will go on. Thank you. Now we're going to talk about discrete emission reduction credits. Discrete emission reduction credits are called DIRCs and function in some ways the same as ERCs. They are generated in units of tons and can be generated from CO, NOx, PM10, SO2, and VOCs. The main difference between ERCs and DIRCs is that ERCs are credits for past actions. If you remember from earlier, we talked about ERCs equal PERCs. Well, with DIRCs, it's slightly different. They must still be quantifiable, surplus, and real. Since they are generated after the emission period and they are for past actions, the reductions were permanent for that period. Since they are not permanent for the life of the facility, they do not have to be enforceable. In other words, DIRCs are generated from temporary reductions. Also, DIRCs have to only be surplus at the time of generation. So if you decide to use DIRTs as offsets, you have to follow these requirements. First, you must have at least 2 years worth of DIRTs in your account to satisfy the offset requirement for the upcoming year and 1 additional year. Second, you must submit a Form DEC2 at least 45 days prior to the start of each year of operation. You must also submit a Form DEC3 within 90 days after the end of each year of operation. You must satisfy these requirements for each year of operation for the life of the project. We've talked about the use of ERCs and DIRTs as offsets, and now I'd like to talk about the use of allowances as offsets. The first type of allowance we will discuss is the Mass Emission Cap and Trade Allowance, which is called the MECT allowances. MECT allowances were developed as a component to help sites that emit NOx compliance flexibility with Chapter 117 of the Texas Administrative Code. The MECT program has a mandatory cap and NOx emissions for all affected facilities in the HGV area. If you are a new site and choose to use MECT allowances as offsets, the first thing you will have to do is purchase the allowances. Do this by submitting a Form ECT4, which is the application for permanent transfer of allowance ownership. And those of you that are familiar with the MECT program, we know we're talking about a stream trade. Do this by submitting a Form ECT4 equal to the 1-to-1 portion of the NOx offset requirement. We will create a new account to hold these allowances. These allowances must be in the account on the first day of each year. There's additional guidance we're working on and it's being developed. When this guidance is approved, we will post this on our website. The 0.3-to-1 portion of the offsets is satisfied by using ERCs or DIRTs. Now, one of the things we've discussed, air permits may allow 0.3-to-1 portion to be offset using MECT allowances. The way the banking team would do this is a Form ECT4 would be submitted making a MECT stream of a trade for a MECT stream of allowances to the TCE retirement account. Once again, you would submit an ECT4 for the 0.3-to-1 portion to the TCE retirement account using an ECT4. The stream of allowances will be permanently retired and can never be used again. Another option available is for a company to generate ERCs from a MECT facility, which can then be used as offsets. This is done by submitting the Form ECT1, Application for Certification of Emission Credits, along with a Form ECT4, transferring allowances to this same TCE retirement account, permanently retiring the stream of MECT allowances. Next are HRVOCs. HRVOCs are ethylene, propylene, 1,3-butadiene, and all isomers of butane. The HEC program is currently limited to Harris County and covers HRVOC emissions from vent flares and cooling towers. The Air Permits Division may consider using a stream of HEC allowances for a project in Harris County to cover all or part of the 1-to-1 portion of the VOC offset requirement. Just like with MECT allowances, the EPA requires that allowances are in the account by the first of each year. There's additional guidance being developed also and will be made available on the banking website. The remaining 0.3-to-1 VOC portion will be offset once again using ERCs and DIRTs. Now this pretty much wraps up this part of my presentation. This is just touching on the different programs and the different type of offsets that we have right now. What this meeting is for is we're looking for comments and suggestions. And so what we have done is basically we have set up, I can see this better. The TCEQ basically said the TCEQ is accepting informal comments on the current options available for use emission credits, which is what I just went over, and allowances to satisfy offset requirements, and on potential alternatives, modifications to the or modifications to the current program. Now we're going to open this up for comments, and so basically we've said from till January 17, 2012, we'll be accepting informal comments. And we're going to use some of the standard ways by mail, and that is our email address. And one of the things I want to stress is the mail code 206. If you